Hello and welcome to Breaking Down, the series where we take an in-depth look at a Fire Emblem unit from a gameplay perspective. Before we start, I would like to thank the people who support me in making content like this and everything else on the channel by backing on Patreon, where for just £1 a month, you can get access to a bunch of benefits, including voting on the release order for this series. For more info, check the link in the description. Today, we will be looking at the younger sister of Seteth and Garrod Mark's resident fish enjoyer, Flayn. Whilst this series is not focused around plot, there is always a chance for spoilers, and certain elements of the game and its structure and story will inevitably be mentioned, so if that is a concern for you, feel free to give it a miss. Also, where relevant, this is considering the maddening difficulty on a regular new game file with no exploits or excessive grinding. If you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing to the channel, and if you could leave a rating on the video, it helps it to reach other people, as does dropping a comment, so I would really appreciate it. Flayn is automatically recruited to your party following the completion of Chapter 6, regardless of the house you are in, making her one of the only units in the game who is guaranteed to join you at a fixed point. This means that there is no skill or level benchmarks to her joining, and you will always have access to her from the start of Chapter 7. If you are leading the Black Eagles and choose to side with Edelgard and head down the Crimson Flower route, then Flayn will leave you on Chapter 12, never to return and eventually showing up as an enemy. One other thing to note is that despite starting as a member of the Church of Seros, following her recruitment, Flayn is effectively treated as a student, meaning she is able to become your dancer should you choose to do so, a unique trait amongst faculty members, although of course, don't do this if you go down Crimson Flower, otherwise you will lose your only dancer for the rest of the game. I learned this the hard way. Flayn's personal ability is Lily's Poise, which causes adjacent allies to take 3 less damage from all attacks. This is a fine personal, but it is a shame it doesn't become available until Chapter 7, as this is probably past the time when you will get the maximum benefit from this ability. Still, it's a decent option when you can trigger it, and may allow you to take an attack with a unit who you otherwise wouldn't be able to. It's not going to be super impactful, but there are some niche situations where it can help you out. Flayn has a major crest of Sethlene, which gives her a 50% chance to increase healing by 5 when using recovery magic. This is mostly really solid and will help to top a unit up just a little bit more with a decent degree of consistency, activating on half of her heals. The only issue with this can be overhealing. The lack of predictability can make it awkward to heal certain units who need their HP to be below specific thresholds to activate abilities like Wrath, Vantage, or the Defiant abilities. That being said, it's only a bump of 5, so you can typically just play around that instead and assume it's going to proc. When we discuss things like skills and stats, it's worth bearing in mind that Flayn joins at level 11 on Chapter 6, so this is her baseline rather than level 1 like most units. This is actually a little unfortunate, as if she joined at the start of Chapter 7 instead of the end of Chapter 6, she would likely be level 13 instead, with everything else being functionally identical, as in practicality she is a Chapter 7 recruit, but this technicality leaves her a little further behind. Past this, Flayn actually has a super small skill spread, with 2 boons in Lancers and Faith, 2 Banes in Heavy Armour and Riding, and a budding talent in Reason. The other thing to note here is that she has a boosted rank in Flying due to her base class certifications, meaning that this starts at a D rank. Flayn is, first and foremost, a mage, so having a boon in Faith is always going to be nice, although even with her C+ base she will be trailing far behind the units who you've been raising throughout the first few chapters. The budding talent in Reason is similarly useful, as when this is mastered by tutoring her in the area 12 times, it will turn into a boon. This will also grant her the ability Seal Magic, reducing an opponent's magic by 6 when they are hit by the user, and they recover 1 magic per turn. This is unlikely to play much of a role, its use cases are just very few and far between, however there could be an outside chance it finds a use. Of course, as with any caster, the spell list will be a vital part of how well they perform. Starting off with her Reason list, it's full of accurate lightweight spells, with Wind coming at the D rank, Fire at D+, Cutting Gale at C, and Excalibur at A. It doesn't pack too much of a punch, but it can be useful for some reliable chip. Excalibur in particular can be very useful for its effective damage against flyers, allowing for some decent burst onto these, although a lot of flyers do have quite a high resistance stat, which does inhibit use of this a little bit. Spells like Cutting Gale are also notable for being particularly light, meaning that it is easier to double with them than it is a lot of other options. On the whole, it's not a terrible spell list, but it would really appreciate something like a 1-3 range option, or just something a bit punchier. Only getting 4 Reason spells rather than the max of 5 is also a bit of a shame. Over in the Faith list, Flayn gets Heal and Nosferatu at D and D+ respectively, like all units, and then at the C rank she gets Restore. This removes any debuffs from all allies within a range surrounding Flayn, including being rattled by gambits. Whilst in most situations this spell won't see any use, when you do need it, it can feel like a huge asset to have on side. It's not great, but it definitely has some niche uses. Flayn is particularly notable for her B rank spell, where she gets Rescue. This allows her to teleport an ally within a range of up to 25% of her magic stat and pull them to be adjacent to her. This is an absolutely premier spell and has a ton of both offensive and defensive capabilities depending on how you choose to employ her, and something that has an impact which can't be understated. Flayn has one more spell to go over in her Faith arsenal, which comes at the A rank, and that spell is Fortify. Fortify is a large area of effect heal, providing a sizable health top up to all allies within a range of 1/4 of Flayn's magic stat. This is a spell where the mileage can vary a lot depending on the build you are running, as within Fire Emblem 3 houses, a lot of low health options are incredibly strong, particularly things like Wrath Vantage and Vengeance. The fact that Fortify heals indiscriminately as long as a unit is within its range means that you will need to position around these units, which can be awkward at best and make the spell straight up a detriment to click at worst. The other issue that Fortify has is that it's just a big AoE heal, which is extremely niche in terms of use cases. Healing is in abundance in 3 houses, and a big top up for a bunch of units at once is just not something that's going to be needed very often, even if you find yourself not using any low health setups. That being said, Flayn does not get access to Physic, so at least Fortify does give her a potential long-range healing option, even if it is one that can be very finicky to set up if you are using some of the game's strongest tools, so it can hold a little more value here than on a unit like Mercedes. Fortify in general is a spell which some players find to be very useful and others find extremely circumstantial, with few if any use cases. The fact that it has huge anti-synergy with low health setups combined with a general lack of demand for a large AoE heal means that I find myself in the latter category, but you're free to make your own judgment, and if you think it's something that you will find a lot of use for, then of course factor that in when considering how you will use her. On the whole, Flayn's spell list is definitely not bad. Rescue makes for a solid standout spell to headline her kit. Her offense is full of some nice reliable low weight chip, with Excalibur having some nice unique advantages, and Restore and Fortify as niche situational things to round things out. Of course, the boons here will help for things like class certifications too, as well as getting some prowess skills. The final boon in Lancers does provide a couple of neat things. At C+, she gets Hit and Run, which is an attack which moves the user back 1 tile after attacking. Honestly, there is a very little chance this will be helpful, especially because she lacks in physical prowess and magic lances are very hard to come by. That being said, she might be able to poke a high resistance priest with it or something, maybe. It's not going to see a ton of use. The other skill she gets, however, at the A rank is extremely nice to have, and that is Frozen Lance. This is a magical combat art, meaning that despite using physical weapons, it is fueled by Flayn's magic stat and targets the enemy's resistance. On top of that, it provides a boost of 2 might, as well as adding 30% of Flayn's dexterity as might to the attack. Overall, this will easily be Flayn's hardest hitting option, and in general, being able to use the high might of weapons whilst hitting on an enemy's resistance will always be a great tool to have access to. Flayn can also take advantage of the effective damage from the Horse Slayer to obliterate mounted opponents, including a lot of bosses, of which there are many throughout the game. For all its upsides though, Flayn does get this a little bit late. The A rank is quite late in comparison to where other units such as Lawrence and especially Marianne and Hubert get this ability. On top of that, Flayn is further away from the A rank at her join time than a unit who you raised in-house would be. Still, whilst it may come a little late, it's still a very powerful tool for Flayn to have in her arsenal, and gives her a genuine damage nuke to let her wipe out almost any enemy. The Lance boon can also be helpful for some class certifications, depending on what you choose to do with Flayn, but I will get more into that later. As for the 2 Banes, the heavy armor one just doesn't matter. Even if you did want to do something techie like an Armor Knight certification to boost Flayn's defense, you would only have to raise it to E+ to gamble the certification, and the Bane just won't impact you too much there. As for riding, this is much more likely to have some notable impact. Whilst Flayn is well spec'd to go for flying classes, and these are often superior, there is only one magical flying battalion in the entire game, so if you have other flying magical units, it can be desirable to go for a grounded class, where options like Valkyrie, Dark Knight, or even Paladin can be desirable. This Bane can impede progress towards those classes, and can be a burden towards Flayn's development. Moving on to the numbers, Flayn's bases are definitely a mixed bag. She joins in Priest, which doesn't have many noticeable benefits. There are definitely some standout areas. 15 magic is fine for a caster at this point in time, around a similar value to where units like Happy or Dorothea would typically be at level 11 in a magic neutral class, although it is worth noting that she won't have any progress towards abilities like Magic plus 2 or Fiendish Blow to amp up her magical damage, which is unfortunate. The strongest point she has is her base 16 charm, which can let her be very accurate with gambits, as well as giving her the immediate option of going straight for the dancer class without any investment or raises here being needed. 19 resistance also comfortably lets her eat magical hits, which can be great for siege tomes, and her dex isn't great, but it's passable enough to give a decent boost to Frozen Lance. On to the bad, and Flayn is slow, like really slow. 9 speed at level 11 is matching some units, like Felix or Leonie at level 1, and base Petra is actually faster. In fact, if we trace it backwards and imagine Flayn joined as a level 1 unit, she would only have 5 base speed at this time, which is less than Raphael. This is why the lightness of her spells can be appreciated, as even meeting speed thresholds on some slower enemies can be a real challenge. 8 strength isn't going to help offset this either, especially not with a 20% growth rate. Finally, while she might have some good resistance, she has basically no physical bulk. If you deploy her on Chapter 7, quite a few enemies on the map can kill her with just a single hit, not even needing a double, although almost all of them will double her regardless. Basically, it's best to keep Flayn out of the enemy's sights. One last thing to note is that Flayn has a couple of might supports, one with Byleth and one with Seteth. These can actually be pretty useful, especially as Flayn has default access to a flying class to be able to help amp these units up regardless of whether or not they are airborne. This is a great advantage for her to have, boosting the damage output of 2 pretty viable combat units. If you plan on using her with Byleth, just try to boost their supports in the monastery before recruiting her, so you have a head start when she joins your squad. When it comes to using Flayn in the game, upon her recruitment there is a lot she will want to do to catch up with the rest of your party and unlock her potential. Whilst pushing towards some of her premier tools such as Frozen Lance or Rescue seems very tempting, she has some basic groundwork that needs to be laid out first, starting with her class certifications. If you plan to use Flayn in any offensive capacity at all, then the first port of call should be to get her into Mage, as mastering the class grants the ability Fiendish Blow. This ability grants the user 6 magic when they initiate combat, and can be a great spike of damage and help Flayn's offensive prowess significantly. The Mage class requires C Reason to guarantee certification, or it can be gambled at D+. Raising Reason in general is a solid option since it allows her to unlock more of her spell list, so it's not really a massive issue to prioritise this over anything else, but it does feel bad to delay access to those big showstoppers. One thing to note is that you may also want to certify Flayn into Monk, and spend a chapter or 2 in here in order to pick up the Magic plus 2 ability. If this is the case, you have a little longer to pick up the Mage class, so you can look into something else, although getting a Reason spell or 2 is probably still a good idea. Unfortunately, there are still some other areas that need to be brought up to standard, particularly Authority. Flayn joins with an E rank here, which isn't enough to even use the basic magical battalions which come at D rank. So this is something that you will definitely want to be pushing up sooner rather than later, and whilst D rank is the minimum, going higher can definitely be ideal. Whilst we are on the topic, it is worth paying attention to the gambit that Flayn has, since her charm allows her to be very accurate, and so large area of effect gambits can be a good commitment on her. It is a bit of a shame she joins in this position without any Reason spells or gambit accessibility, as it adds to this almost mandatory bit of catch up you have to do before you can pick up the strong fun stuff. That being said, you do want to grab those big hitters pretty soon, with your priority depending on your team setup. Flayn is much closer to Rescue than she is to Frozen Lance, and whilst both become better with high movement, Rescue retains a lot of its defensive usage even with low move classes such as Mage, which can be helpful. That being said, once you've mastered the class and picked up Fiendish Blow, if you wanted to make use of Frozen Lance before level 20, you could always jump into Pegasus Knight to take advantage of its higher move, Canto access, and flight, although of course this will lock you out of using any spells and will only allow you to use flying battalions. In general, Flayn is best used as a gap filler. She won't be a star standout player, but she can fill in a lot of different roles, and that's how you can best utilise her from the get-go. If you need some additional movement utility, focus your play around Rescue. If you need an extra damage nuke, focus your play around Frozen Lance. Outside of classes and ranks, the main thing that Flayn needs to do is catch up on levels. Pushing her to level 20 is pretty crucial to getting the most out of her, so you do want to try and keep keep her accelerating as best as possible. This can also be done by using her as an adjutant on units who see a lot of combat, like enemy phase units. Certifying into and mastering Mage, unlocking Reason spells, mastering Monk, raising Authority to access viable battalions, raising Lances to access Frozen Lance, raising Faith to unlock Rescue. Flayn has a lot to do when she first joins your party, and despite joining later than most units, she definitely isn't good to go, or even close to it from her arrival, unlike a lot of the other faculty recruitment options. While she does take some serious attention to get up to speed, when she does, she can have a very powerful combination of tools in Frozen Lance and Rescue, giving her a nuke alongside a movement ability with great offensive and defensive potential. One other thing that can be beneficial is to raise swords to the C rank to allow for usage of a Levin sword, or more specifically its forged variant, the Levin Sword Plus. This is because the weapon has 1 to 3 range, something which Flayn is sorely lacking in her kit itself. Of course, there are other ways to amp up her range, such as the staves Thyasus or Caduceus, but these are in high demand, although it is worth noting that Flayn's crest gives her a bonus with the latter, restoring 33% of her HP at the start of each turn, although this is pretty negligible as Flayn typically shouldn't be taking mounds of damage, especially not repeatedly. One of the things you need to establish early on with Flayn is how many magical flyers you plan on having in your party. This is due to the aforementioned limit on flying magical battalions, with there being only one in the game. If you already plan to use another, it may be worth considering making one of those units a grounded unit instead, and if Flayn happens to be the nominee of choice, you may also want to make sure you are bumping up her riding so that she can lock in a class like Valkyrie. If it was just a straight up comparison, then Dark Flyer is almost definitely better, especially considering the tools that Flayn has, with Frozen Lance requiring you to get up close, and Rescue massively benefiting from positioning options. Dark Flyer requires B+ Reason and C Flying for a guaranteed certification, and does bring some other advantages besides just flight. 7 move is more than serviceable, and Canto is always a great asset too. On top of that, the class comes with Black Tome Fair, which increases the damage of all black magic spells by 5. This can be a very nice damage amplifier, although it is worth noting that the class does not bring a magic modifier whilst you are in it, unlike a lot of other magically inclined classes, so things like Frozen Lance do not receive any boosts. So whilst the flying option is ideal, you may also want that option for another unit, and not being able to use a magical battalion while doing so can make a grounded option preferable, depending on how much you intend to use Flayn offensively. Pushing through the Riding Bane is not as problematic as it may initially seem. It's more just the time you have to get both the Riding Bane and the Reason skill in a position to certify for classes, but it's definitely doable without a massive amount of trouble, making this a valid option when that flying battalion is contested. The Valkyrie class itself does have a lot of merit to be considered as an option. Whilst it doesn't bring any tone variability, it does have a +4 magic modifier, so there is still a sizable boost to her spell damage as well as a boost to Frozen Lance, which is not seen with Dark Flyer. It might not be as mobile as the flying class, but 6 move in Canto is still decent in this regard. On top of this, Valkyrie comes with a range booster to Flayn's Reason spells in the form of the ability Black Magic Range +1, meaning that she can attack with these from further away, which can help to compensate for the lack of move, although the mobility still holds back Frozen Lance and Rescue compared to Dark Flyer. Even if you did choose to go for Dark Flyer, Valkyrie may still be a valuable detour because of its mastery ability, Uncanny Blow. This ability grants the user an additional 30 hit when they initiate combat, and can massively improve reliability, particularly against dodgier targets. This ability is very nice, but Flayn spells are very accurate anyway, so whether or not you plan on picking this up for a Dark Flyer build depends on how much you plan to use her Frozen Lance combat art. If you see yourself mainly taking advantage of her spells, either from a utility or damage perspective, then you probably shouldn't go out of your way for this. I do believe that these two options are Flayn's best, but there is something to note here. These classes are both only accessible with the DLC, meaning that if you don't have this, you are unable to access either of these. Flayn is definitely one of the units who benefits the most from the presence of the DLC classes, and she sees a significant spike from these being accessible, particularly Dark Flyer. However, obviously not all players will have the DLC, so that does beg the question of what other options are available. Outside of Dark Flyer and Valkyrie, there are some other choices. Also at the advanced level is Bishop, which comes with some notable up and downsides. The class requires a Faith to guarantee certification, and considering the boon, this can be really easily achieved, meaning that Bishop is a very low investment option. It also has a couple of nice abilities. White Magic Healing plus 10 can give a nice amp up to her healing if you find that's something you are wanting, and White Magic uses times 2 doubles the uses of all of her Faith spells, including Rescue and Fortify, which can be highly valuable, although despite its prowess, 6 uses of Rescue is probably a little overkill, especially given the class's restrictions. The drawbacks of this class mainly come in the form of its mobility, or more accurately, its lack thereof. Bishop only has 4 move, which heavily reduces the impact of Rescue, as your positioning to be able to get these rescues off becomes much more limited, and in particular, using Rescue offensively becomes a lot harder, due to both the reduced movement, as well as the lack of Canto to get out afterwards. Of course, Frozen Lance also becomes much harder to use with only 4 move due to its 1 range, particularly at this stage of the game when many allies and enemies will have far more move than this. Warlock could also be considered here, which requires a reason to guarantee the qualification. Whilst the class does have its upsides, like a +2 magic modifier, the ability Black Tome Fair, and the ability Black Magic Spells times 2, which doubles the use of all of her Black Magic spells, the class's drawbacks are very similar to Bishop's, having incredibly low movement, bringing with it all of the same downsides as its faith-based counterpart. Still, if you don't have the DLC, one of these options will likely be ideal at an advanced level. Upon reaching level 30, some more options do open up. One that is much more specialised is Falconite, which basically has the sole purpose of amping up Frozen Lance. This will give her her highest consistent damage output by letting her make use of the class's Lance Fair ability, as well as its 8 move, Flight, and Canto. This does remove all of her spell list usage, and losing out on Rescue is a very big loss, but it does give Flayn a lot of validity as a damage nuke, and even if you don't plan on using it all the time, it can be a nice option to have available to flick over to when you need the extra burst. This class has a requirement of C Swords, B+ Flying, and A Lances to guarantee the qualification, which can be pretty easily achieved. The Lance rank will already be met if you have picked up Frozen Lance. The performance here is fine as a player phase nuke, but you do miss out on that spell list, which can be quite impactful. If you wanted an option which provides some solid mobility as well as spell list access, and you don't have access to the DLC classes, then Dark Knight may be the best option. This masterclass has requirements of B+ Reason, C Lances, and A Riding, and whilst the Riding Bane can be annoying here, you have until level 30 to hit these requirements, so this is perfectly achievable by that time. The class comes with 7 move and Canto, allowing for some solid mobility, albeit without flight, so terrain can be an inhibitor, but still you should have good capacity for both aggressive and defensive rescues, as well as being able to close the gap on opponents for optimal Frozen Lance usage. Of course, unlike with Falconite, the class does give spell list access for both offensive and utility purposes. Dark Knight also comes with Black Tome Fair, allowing for a damage amp on the spells, making it a very solid option all around for those without access to Dark Flyer or Valkyrie. Holy Knight may seem like a tempting option, but honestly it's just a worse version of the Dart variant, since White Tome Fair is much worse as Faith Magic just doesn't pack as many relevant offensive spells, so if a mounted caster is what you're looking for, Dark Knight is the way to go. The last class that warrants any consideration here is Gremory, thanks to it basically just being a better version of Bishop, packing both white and dark magic uses times 2 along with 5 move rather than Bishop's 4. The additional mobility here is a fairly significant power spike over the advanced class, even if it is only 1 point more, it really does help her keep up a lot better. On top of this, Gremory also brings a magic modifier of 5, so will help out her damage with both spells and Frozen Lance. Although getting into range to use this consistently can still be an issue, especially since the lack of Canto means you can't retreat out afterwards. Whilst Gremory is significantly better, it also has an entire additional rank bolted onto the requirements with A Faith and A Reason needed to guarantee the certification. That being said, it still isn't out of reach and can be easily hit in time for level 30. This is obviously a lot of options, but if you are lacking the DLC, I think in general Dark Knight will be the best class most consistently, although picking up Falconite and Gremory to flex into in case you need them is never a bad idea. With the deaccessible, however, Dark Flyer is definitely your best option for Flayn, with either Dark Knight or Valkyrie being valuable alternatives in the event that you may also have another magical flyer and want access to a battalion. I think that about wraps up Flayn. I hope this helps you to get the most out of her. If you're interested in discussing this video, the channel, or Fire Emblem in general, consider joining the Discord. Before we finish, I would like to once again thank everyone who backs the channel on Patreon, where for just £1 a month, you can support me in making content like this and everything else on the channel, as well as getting benefits for yourself too. For more information, check the link in the description. Finally, I would like to thank you all for watching, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and have a great day!